Find your future by exploring your world. The Massachusetts School of Law challenges their students to explore the important issues of our time, learning from experts in fields like politics, sports, and business law. From first-hand accounts and dramatic reenactments, in-depth conversations with society's leaders, from historians to lawyers, from high-tech professionals to environmental experts. The Massachusetts School of Law at Andover presents mslaw.edu.
Women were portrayed on television in the 1960s as homemakers. They were in the kitchen in high heels stirring a pot, or they were secretaries, teachers, or nurses. There were very few female doctors, lawyers, policewomen, scientists, or politicians. In 1961, President Kennedy established the President's Commission on the Status of Women. The commission influenced the creation of the National Organization for Women, known as NOW. Hello and welcome to mslaw.edu. I am Diane Sullivan, Assistant Dean at the Massachusetts School of Law. Join me now as I sit down with a group of incredible women to discuss what it was like living and working in the 1960s. Let's see if their lives and what they learned along the way provide a blueprint for today's women.
I have some doubts about that. What I'd learned early on was that you could not have it all. And I think that there are women today who do have it all, albeit difficult for them, but I never felt I could. And I had to fight my way in order to be able to have a career and have a happy marriage and have a good home life as well as having a good professional life. It was tough.
And you know, I do agree with that, and so I'd be interested in your opinions that in our days, it was, in my assessment also, just impossible to have everything.
Well, if I may, I think you can have it all today, but not all at the same time. I think there are trade-offs no matter when you're dealing with it. When there's a lot of pressure on your career, it's going to inflict itself upon your home life.
So I think about our young law students. Would your advice then be establish your career first and then go out and have your family so that you have your professional experience? Because it's tough to do everything all at the same time.
My advice would be decide what's most important to you.
Okay.
Really
exactly.
think about what you want and what you want out of life, and then go from there. I think our generation was much more, I'm 83 years old, we were much more accustomed to just going with the flow and, okay, this is what's happening now, how will I deal with it? And I think to think ahead about what's most important. If having a family is most important to you, go ahead with that. Don't worry that your career has to be most important because other people say it is.
I think in our day, things evolved, and if you were lucky,
Exactly.
you had a partner who could and would support you, and things worked out or didn't, depending on more on your individual initiative. I think what hasn't kept up are the laws that would be most beneficial, such as support for daycare and family leave, and taking care of elderly parents, whatever it happens to be, that would support you regardless of whether you decide to do family first or career first.
I think one of the things that being older gives you is a perspective. And I think I didn't have the perspective I have now when I was making choices along the way. And when you get to be our age, you can kind of look back and think, at that time, that seemed so incredibly important, and now I realize it wasn't.
Wisdom comes with the ages, doesn't it?
And that's something that you learn. So as far as being a blueprint, that's kind of hard to say because we made the mistakes along the way, and maybe some of those you have to make to find out.
And my blueprint would have been the happy marriage and a big family. I really would have liked 12, but I only got halfway there. But anyway, when that dream marriage fell apart after 25 years, I suddenly had to earn a living, and I was very fortunate to be in a spot where a law was passed. They had to hire women. And somebody said, would you like a job? And I said, yes, I desperately need a job. And so I started a new career in pharmaceutical sales, and it turned out to be a very wonderful career for me. And I was able to raise my children and be very happy doing it.
I'd like to go back over it for 1 second and add, I think your mate, the choice of your mate is very, very important today, because the men of today, and I know from my sons and son-in-law and grandchildren, and the male grandchildren particularly, they cook, they clean, they rush home from their work if their wives are working later. I know some of them have wives that perhaps earn more money than they do. All of that kind of thing is very, very different than it was in my day.
That is such an important point. Pick a good partner.
I think the most important thing for me, though, was to find out who was inside. Who was this person that I had been living with and going to college? I went to college to find out just who are you? And that helped me enormously to figure out what I wanted to do, what choices I wished to make, and which kinds of people I really loved and enjoyed. But it was the who.
Great comments.
Those of us who married young were either lucky or not in terms of our being able to grow up together and provide mutual support so that the other one could continue to grow and develop. And
Because it's easy to go the other way,
It
to
is.
marry young and
Yep.
grow up differently. Yep.
yeah.
Tell the audience what was the biggest hurdle that you faced during your lifetime.
Being a female. My degree was in textile chemistry. It never occurred to me. I went to Lowell Tech. There were 1,000 guys and 25 females. I was stupid enough so that it never occurred to me that I couldn't get the job the guys were getting, and I couldn't. I eventually got a job where I developed the testing lab for a 700-store chain, trained their technicians, set up the lab, and then when I got pregnant, I had to hire my replacement. And I hired a guy I'd gone to school with, and my boss said, we know he's not as good as you are, Mrs. Hodis, but we are going to have to pay him more because he is a man. That was 1963. I had absolutely no legal recourse. And I suddenly realized, I guess around the time I graduated college, I began to realize that even though I could do all the things men could do, the mere fact that I was a female made me something less.
And on the positive side of things is the fact that you were in a field, what we call today the STEM field,
Right.
in which still there's such a disparity in the number of women that go on to be engineers and scientists, and we're still struggling at how do we rectify this? Because law schools, medical schools are 50% or greater females in the incoming class, but that is still not true in the science, engineering, and math field.
And even where it is true, you are dealing with the hierarchy, the hiring hierarchy, which still sees females as lesser, only I find it's worse than it was because it was very open. I realized it wasn't me, it was my sex. And now I watch two of my daughters who are in professions where they're never quite sure because that's something that is very covert. And one of the things I've done, because it means a lot to me, I sponsor a 100-hour-a-year fellowship for a woman in one of the STEM programs in the Honors College at UMass Lowell.
Isn't that wonderful?
She gets 100 hours of mentoring. It's a different woman every year in her field by a professor.
I think you articulate that so well. I had a much more direct confrontation about being a woman in my career. The man that hired me was told he had to hire me. He had an opening and they needed a female, and I was it, and that was it. He told me very directly, you have taken a man's job and you will carry a man's bag. And he gave me no allowance for anything and put pressure on me. Every call I made, he tried to tear me down because he wanted me to quit to prove his saying women can't handle this job.
And you proved him wrong.
I proved him wrong. Eventually, he worked for me.
Excellent. That's the best news yet.
That's what it is.
Let me ask you collectively, were your relationships with men or partners conventional? And what do you believe are the key ingredients to a successful relationship? Norma, I'm back to you.
I'd love to talk about that. You know, when Harvey and I first married, we had, I think, a conventional marriage. I was an actor, and I assumed that I would be acting forever and ever. Unfortunately, various things happened, and so I could not do that. However, he was supportive of that only to a certain degree. And I will tell a little story, as a matter of fact, because later on in our marriage, I was invited to go onto the board of the state board of the what's the women's that we all were in?
League of Women
League of Women Voters. Thank you, thank you. And I remember bringing my children and my husband into a room, sitting down with them and telling them that I had just been made this wonderful offer that excited me because I had not been doing the kinds of things that I wanted to do. And I said, so let me ask you how you all feel about this. Well, my kids looked at me as though I was crazy. They had no idea what I was talking about. To ask them to make an adult decision was stupid on my part. But my husband said to me, only if it doesn't interfere with my career. And I remember saying, oh no, dear. Oh no, darling, sweetheart. I make sure it won't interfere with your career. Now, let's fast forward. Okay, we fast forward, the women's movement started. I started in realizing that that was a pretty bad moment in my marriage, actually. But at one point, we took off to Arizona, and we were in the lifelong learning program there, and someone offered a class in women's issues particularly. My husband was one of the very few men in that class, and it changed him totally. What I could not have done with him, other people did. And it was a very interesting change. After that, he became a feminist.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah. I had a total, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry, Pat.
Go right ahead, and then we'll come back to Pat.
I had a totally different, and it surprised me because we were not kids when we got married. I was 24, my husband was 31. He had come from a rather traditional family, although he did not have a traditional upbringing. He'd been in the service. I met him in college. He went on the GI Bill. And first 3 years I worked, not a problem. I had my first child and became very unhappy staying home. And found a volunteer organization, and he could not have been more supportive. I said, well, you know, I'm going to be out nights. He said, I can take care of our child, not a problem. And throughout our life together, although it seemed, I mean, going to Lowell Tech, a lot of my, to coin a cliche, best friends were guys. I was treated as one of the guys. He and I started out as friends before we ever dated. But he was supportive if I changed jobs, if something happened, if I wanted to go back to school. And looking back, it amazes me that a man of his age and his upbringing could be that supportive. He was the one who went to my daughter's kindergarten class when she was told she couldn't play with the trucks. And he said, she can play with the trucks. She doesn't have to play in the doll corner. And he was the one who told his folks if they were giving their grandson, who was 3 weeks older than she was, a truck for Christmas, they would give her a truck. She didn't have to get dolls. She had plenty of them. So it still amazes me that a man from his time and his upbringing was as, I cannot believe how lucky I was. Truly, and I have not made him into a saint since he died, because I used to call him Saint Lawrence when he was alive.
And maybe you ought to not share what you call him now.
What he called me.
You had a comment.
Yes. Well, I was the first woman secretary of the Academy at Phillips Academy, and that is the chief fundraising role. It was called Secretary of the Academy because Amherst had a secretary of the college, and it had always been a man.
Wow.
And when I became the first secretary of the Academy, people thought I was the headmaster's secretary.
Of course.
But they soon learned differently. But I did incur a fair amount of resentment from some of the men who had been in the office. And I was called, oh, you must be using your sex in order to get ahead. And that really annoyed me.
And right it should.
Of course it should. But this was, much earlier on than the women's movement had started, but not in full force. I was not paid as much as the men had been.
Of course not.
But I was not smart enough to have demanded more.
Well, what is your take on the Metoo movement?
Oh, I'm very in favor of it. Because I gained it in some ways, but not in the ways that today's women are able to. It did not occur to me that I should demand. I was so pleased to be chosen. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that was the woman in me.
Yes, of course.
But because I was a woman, I was very good at what I was doing, because women are good fundraisers.
All of you ladies are way ahead of your time, and I compliment you for that. That's why we're sitting here today. I think there's a lot that you can tell us that we can learn from, so I thank you for doing that.
Well, we're also very good at multitasking. I mean, that's something, whether it's innate or whether it's a learned skill, I feel it's something that served me very well. I honestly cannot say, and I had a long career, 40 years or so, evolving from my first job, which was as a social worker, to my final job, which was policy director for the State Department of Mental Health. I can't ever really say that I was discriminated against because I was a woman. I think anything that could be seen as holding me back was more internal than external, because I always saw myself as the perfect number two. I didn't kind of want to be out there. When I worked for a politician, I was really happy to do all her writing and do all the research, but I didn't want to be out there running for office. That wasn't for me. And the same was true with jobs. I was very happy to provide the support. I don't know how much of that has to do with being a female or just my own personality, because my husband supported me entirely, and when he was finally done with all of his training and was launched in his career as a physician, he then encouraged me to go back to graduate school and cook dinner, because I came home late. I've never taken off the 25 pounds that I put on, because the only thing he knew how to make was put chicken in a pan and cover it with cream of mushroom soup and throw some noodles in for me.
But it was great as long as you didn't have to cook it.
Great, but I never quite got over the extra weight. But
I think that mothering is the ability to do multiple tasking things, and we've all done that.
Yes.
And I think if we're fortunate enough to have a partner, which I went on to marry again and had the most supportive partner in the world, who I was working and going to school nights at BU, and he would type all my papers for me and correct my spelling. Everything made me an A student straight through. And he was wonderful. But I think women used to attach themselves to men for power because they couldn't get it themselves. And I found growing through my career, oh, surprise, I have power as well. And it was wonderful to get in touch with that. And I think that's the biggest thing that's come out of the women's movement for me, is the power that we can acknowledge that we have and we can use.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because if we turn the clock back to 1960, we had 2 women as senators, and we had 17, and I believe the total count in the House was 435 members or thereabouts.
Yep, that's right.
And so women didn't have political power. That has totally changed. I mean, we're not at equality yet, are we?
No.
Okay, but let's hope we're going to get there.
But I never felt that that was an impossible thing to have. I never felt that I could not do it if I wanted to do it. I would see something in front of me, a challenge in front of me, and that was the most exciting thing for me, was to be challenged and overcome the challenge, feel good about what I was doing, and I went from thing to thing. My very last job that I had that pleased me enormously was, of course, being on the staff of American Civil Liberties Union. But that happened only because I had gone from the League of Women Voters to doing any number of other things along the way. And suddenly I felt empowered, and people saw me that way. And I think you have to feel that way in order for other people to feel that way about you.
Debbie, I wonder if you would talk for a moment about what it was like to grow up in an era where women on TV were in the kitchen stirring a pot with pearls and stiletto heels. And we never saw women as doctors, bus drivers, police officers, lawyers. What was that like, and how do you feel about it now?
Well, not only was it on TV, it was my mother. So I'm watching her do it and then sing it on TV. So I thought that's the way things were. And I always felt it was important because she got divorced when she was 50. She had never worked a day in her life. And the shock of that was actually not great for her, but it was good for me, because that's when I went back to school. I got a master's. I, had a plan in mind because I was married young and had gone right into child rearing and all of that. And that was an eye-opener to me. Because I think there was that stereotype. I was raised in the 50s. I was married in 66. And it was just on that cusp of things changing. Mm-hmm. And I think we were talking about power, that children nowadays, my daughter, is much more powerful than I felt I was back then because of some of those stereotypes. When I went back to work, I never even thought to ask my husband whether he would help out or what was. I just assumed if I'm going back, you just add one more thing to what you're doing. And every time for a long time I did something else, it was knowing that, or thinking that I was also going to be doing every other step back to the beginning. And nowadays there's not that feeling, and I don't think the girls, what were the girls then, children nowadays, they don't see that stereotype, so they're not raised with it. It's not something they need to get rid of and overcome.
So what message would you give to young girls in the audience about domestics?
Well, I don't think you can say domestic is bad and career is good. I enjoyed all parts of my life. And I think Toby said it earlier, you have to look at what your priorities are. And if this is important to you and you want to do it now, that's fine. Whether it's cooking, cleaning, whatever, part of those things just come with the chores. But I think that, it's not a good idea to say one thing is good and one thing is bad, because we all went through that. You had to work in the 60s, or, if you were an at-home mom, it was something that was kind of embarrassing.
At a certain
yeah.
educational level.
Yes, exactly.
I just want to say that I have a daughter who's in her early 50s, and we basically told our daughters they could be anything they wanted to be. This one listened and became a physician, but she's now a single mom with 2 teenagers, and the work world is still not set up for single moms. doctor or not. I mean, every working woman needs a wife, and that's however you want to define
Yeah,
that.
my middle daughter, who's an executive for Citigroup, used to say, I need a wife desperately.
Yeah, because you still need to leave, to be at meetings that are required because you're your child's only parent available, or you need to pick them up, but okay, also you have an emergency at the hospital. So that balancing act hasn't really improved to the extent that one would hope in terms of societal supports.
I'll tell you a funny little story that happened at Thanksgiving, and it was a sweet little story. It tells a lot. At Thanksgiving, my granddaughter's in-laws were there, and I was nearby, sitting nearby the kitchen, so I could sort of watch everything going on in the kitchen. And my granddaughter's mother-in-law came up to her and said, "The pies need to get heated." And my granddaughter turned to her mother-in-law and said, "Tell that to your son, please." I love that.
And so tell us the rest of the story. Did he heat the pies?
Well, yes, he did. I mean, he was perfectly willing to do it. It wasn't. That showed the generation difference. You see.
Yes.
It was a very interesting little moment because he was perfectly willing. He wouldn't care. He'd be perfectly willing to put the pies in the oven.
But your granddaughter's mother-in-law should be more the generation of our daughters than our generation.
Yeah.
And so
She
it
is
kind of surprises me.
Not quite. She's a little bit older. She just happens to be a little bit older mother. But she was in the kitchen and assumed, of course, that her daughter-in-law would put the pies in the oven.
That's part of what I said.
It's women's work after all.
Part of what I said with the hiring hierarchy.
Right.
There is still this image, whatever, amongst an enormous number of people that the separation of the sexes and what they are responsible for is still there. Just as racism is still there, whether you think you're racist or not. That kind of thinking is still very deeply embedded.
The evidence is very clear that women still primarily take care of the domestic and the kids, and now they just work full time and even may be the income producer for that family, but they still do shoulder most of the things that go on at home.
And don't forget taking care of the older generation. That's
Yes.
also,
That's right.
that also
That's-
falls
that's a big one.
primarily
That's why
on
I'm
women.
here, so my daughters don't have to do that.
But some
Yes.
some men are pretty good at being
Yes.
partners.
Yes.
And I happen to have that kind of husband. He does not cook, he does not do laundry.
That's okay.
He does not do that kind of thing. But he is a very good partner in allowing me freedom to do what I want to do.
Important.
And he also helped me raise 2 boys, one of whom is the chief cook in the family. He also happens to be an assistant U.S. attorney. But he does the cooking. His wife is an optometrist. She keeps the house more or less tidy with help. Not from him, but with help. He does his laundry, she does her laundry. And so they've got things worked out. And that, I think, is what marriage is about.
Yeah.
And
Working it
that's
out.
what makes men and women click together and work together and enjoy each other. If they work out their own details.
Wonderful comment.
Yes.
And in work too, in the workplace, men and women have to work out those details. And I had a struggle to get to where I was because being the first one, and there were plenty of men who said, of course, we cannot have a woman be the head of Phillips Academy fundraising. It has to be a man. But my staff actually went to the head and to the board of trustees and said, we'd like to have Pat be the head of the office. And so I was very pleased. It was a mixed staff too. They were not all women. And there were several men in the staff. But you get to learn how you work with people. You get to learn how you do your marriage. And it's life for me is the wonderful part of it is the learning experience. And still today, even though I'm 88, I'm trying to learn lots more.
From day one, I knew I took the right step.
The Massachusetts School of Law is challenging,
but you feel welcomed and supported at every turn.
You're learning the professional skills you need to get hired.
From professors with real-world experience.
Trust me, that makes a huge difference.
I now have a job I love, and the best part is, I'm not in debt.
No LSATs required. Teachers that make a difference at the most affordable law school in New England, the Massachusetts School of Law. Your future starts here.
Welcome back. In July of 2018, President Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh for Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. The Senate Judiciary Committee questioned Judge Kavanaugh and heard witnesses' testimony concerning his nomination. Subsequent thereto, it was revealed that Christine Blasey Ford had written a letter to Senator Dianne Feinstein accusing Kavanaugh of sexual assault while they were in high school in 1982. The committee postponed its vote and invited both Kavanaugh and Blasey Ford to appear at a hearing. Both testified before the committee. The following day, the nomination was forwarded to the full Senate on an 11-10 vote. On October 6, following a supplemental, quote, FBI investigation into the allegations, the Senate voted 50-48 to confirm Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court. Our guests reacted to the nomination and compare it to that of Clarence Thomas.
Golly, it makes me so angry. It's hard to even talk about it in terms of teaching or in terms of where we are in America today, where we are with women and with men that don't seem to understand the issues that we have faced in terms of being sexual objects to men for generation after generation after generation. That's changing a bit, and your students are not going to have to face it quite the way many of us did in various places, in various workplaces. Now, I did not have that problem, but I did very early on in my career, but certainly not after I started working with what I would consider adult males, and males that had much more interest and information available to them that they needed to hear, needed to understand what women have gone through in terms of being sexual objects.
I take exception with your saying that the students today don't have to work. If a man like Brett Kavanaugh, who's only in his 50s, and he had this attitude towards women, that they were here for him.
But yes, but she didn't do anything at the time. And at the time that it happened. That's really, I didn't say that. I should have added that to what I was talking about.
Yeah, but she wasn't believed in today's day and age.
Not even by her father.
Well, I'm not so sure she wasn't believed. I think so much of the reaction to his nomination had as much to do with our polarized political environment and the fact that certain people wanted him confirmed as a Supreme Court judge.
No matter what.
Kind of whether or not he had gone out in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shot somebody, as somebody else in our political world has said. So I think that they were just primed to disregard any of the evidence and how we feel about what he did or may have done I think is almost irrelevant.
Is this now, when we see it, whether it's in the media, whether it's in Hollywood, whether it's in, business, are we in a period of outrage that you think women have said, this is it, okay, we're not going to take it anymore?
In other venues, there have been swift and very certain consequences for that behavior. People were fired, they were let go from TV stations, but Brett Kavanaugh got to be confirmed as a Supreme Court justice.
Debbie and then Norma.
Okay. I was just going to say, I think men still don't get it. I think there's a level that they get that's the obvious. I mean, rape, that kind of very end result. But I think all of the little stuff along the way, a whistle, comments, I think men still don't quite understand how these affect women. It's not a compliment to a woman. Okay. And I think there's still that, I don't think, certainly in this case, you're absolutely right, they were going to vote for him no matter what. And I think back when the whole Clarence Thomas and all of that was still too early on. And what I had hoped was they had learned. And that's the thing I think is most depressing. It was the exact same thing how many years later?
I want to believe so much, Norma, in your statement that 20 years from now, this is no longer going to be an issue.
Well, it may be more than 20 years. I'm not sure. And I'm not going to even guess on how many years, but I do think it has changed. I do think that the issue for men, certain groups of young men, and a lot depends on class, have had the opportunity to be educated in terms of what this means to a woman and what it does to a woman and what the obligation is to a man in terms of if he sees an attractive woman, he doesn't immediately feel that he can go and grab her or that she will respond to his sexual needs or whatever that is. We're growing up. We're growing up slowly. And should this have been done a long time ago? Of course it should. But all social issues, oh my goodness gracious, we find that we're fighting them again and again. I mean, it's like the abortion issue. You think it's over and done with, and it's not. It's back. It's back on the front burner again. And it can make you crazy because you think you've already done it. You've put all of your heart and soul into something, and it's still out there. But eventually things change. I mean, even though we talk about racism like you have, it is changing slowly and incrementally, and it's not over, and we're still fighting it.
It's like two steps forward and a step and a half back, though.
Well, I don't. Yes, yeah, but not with everybody. Right. Not with everybody. More people understand racism than ever before in my lifetime.
You know, you mentioned Clarence Thomas, and I had, at the time that Clarence Thomas was being nominated, I had a very interesting and personal conversation with a colleague at work. We were very good friends. He was a black man, a little older than I was, and we had very honest discussions about things having to do with race and so forth. And I asked him, because Clarence Thomas, in addition to the accusations of sexual harassment, seemed like a less than a less than qualified person to be nominated for the Supreme Court. And I said, Ed, you know, how can your community support this? And he said, you know, this is really hard to say, but we're really afraid that if Clarence Thomas is not confirmed as a Supreme Court justice, there will not be another black justice in our lifetimes. And that's kind of what it boiled down to.
And you hear that about a female president. That's the very same argument.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask a different question. Do you agree with Eleanor Roosevelt, who at about age 75, and I'm going to paraphrase, said, if you stop making a contribution, then you're starting to die? What do you
Yeah,
think?
or you stop living, I
Yeah.
think maybe is what, I'm not sure whether that's.
Absolutely.
When you cease making a contribution, you are no longer on the path to keep on living.
Well, I think it's so individual. I mean, I feel as though that's my life. So I don't feel I have a choice. I really don't. And it sounds kind of strange because I think somebody could say to me, well, you could just refuse to do such and such. I can't. I'm not able to. I'm not able to say that's not an important issue and I have to speak out about it or I have to do something about it. And I have since the age of 17.
But Norma, I want to tell the audience for a minute, trying to get us all together to do this wasn't the easiest thing. And although I'm never going to ask any of us, nor am I going to disclose my weight, we have talked about age. Norma, you're approaching 90, and you are working with kids from the inner schools to help them improve their lives.
Well, I don't know that I am. I don't know if what I'm doing in that way is a big thing. I was a volunteer for an organization called CC Puede, and I still do some volunteer stuff over the telephone with different organizations like that want some advice on fundraising or how to move from where they are to where they would like to be. And I do that with pride. I really love doing it. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel alive. It makes me feel as though I'm doing something for the world. It's doing something for my families and children and all of that. I'll never stop. I'll never till the day. Well, I don't know.
Then you won't begin to die.
I don't know what's going to happen. I'm 88.
Well, I think something we hear a lot here as people are retiring and slowing down, they're feeling like they're losing their purpose. But I think we have a great community here that invites us to become involved and to do something, whether it's running the grocery store here, teaching a course, behaving in some way to help others. And we all are encouraged to do it. And I think being part of a good, loving community makes that happen for us, and it's a great blessing.
I mean, for me, I had a role model, my mother, who was always doing something, even up to the day she died at almost 91, she had a list of people she called every week to make sure that they were okay. Our living room in our 3-room apartment in New York City was always piled with goods that were being collected to be sent overseas. My dad was in charge of wrapping them up. So I think that's in my DNA, and I still go to Lowell weekly and volunteer teaching English to refugees, which makes me feel like I'm a contributor.
You are.
So I can't
Thank you.
think of not doing that.
And I too have that feeling that my mother was, during the Second World War, my mother was head of the Motor Corps in Wellesley. She was on the Girl Scout board. She did many things. She was a nurse's aide at Newton Wellesley Hospital. She juggled all these things, and she was an air raid warden.
Oh, wow.
And so I had a mother whom I could admire for the various ways she interacted with the community. My father, too. And so I had advice from them. And my father sat me down before I went to college and said, you can be whoever you wish to be.
Wonderful.
And so when I went to college, then I had that view. And I've been a volunteer. I love to raise money for all kinds of
And you're very good at
Talk to me after the show.
and I still do. And I'm on the board of Family Services in Lawrence, which is a very, very important organization in Lawrence.
And they need your help.
And they're about to start another campaign, and so they do come and ask. And they are a good organization, and I like to volunteer for things like that. And I work with my church, volunteering there too. And so I still think that being out and doing things is what makes me feel good. And it makes George, my husband, feel good too. He does a lot of stuff here and other places. So we're still active. And that, I think, is what life is about. You have to stay active, and we still believe in causes, and the causes of women, and he joins me in that.
That's wonderful.
And the causes of all kinds of underserved people. And when you were talking about Clarence Thomas, I was at out in Los Angeles at the time, watching it on TV. There were 2 women and 4 Andover men. The Andover men, whom I had great respect for up until that time, all were sure, oh, she's lying. That's not, no. And the 2 women said, of course she's not lying. She's telling the truth. He's the one who's lying. We know, because we've been in those shoes. And so I think today's society has grown up this much, but it hasn't gotten to the top.
So we're not at equality.
Not really, no. Women are perceived differently. They may be given a job and they do it well, but they are not always perceived the same way as the male leading that role.
That's right.
Why else would you have to have a reason to get up in the morning? I mean, back to your question about are you involved? Have been very involved in the learning and retirement group at UMass Lowell. I'm very involved in my temple. I've gotten involved here. I need a reason to get up in the morning. And unfortunately, when I first became a mother, having a child was insufficient reason. I need a reason to keep my intellect going. And if my brain is not going, as far as I'm concerned, I'm dead. Brain dead is the equivalent.
And you've got a wonderful brain.
Yes.
So I just say you got to keep involved, doing whatever it is that helps you thrive.
And society needs this type of involvement that you all are so demonstrative of.
Absolutely.
I think at different times you're involved in different ways, and I think that's sort of part of the aging process. I can't be involved. I use a wheelchair, so I can't be involved in the way I was in the past, and it's finding new ways to involve your mind, which I think is really important. If you sort of let that muscle go, you're in trouble. But finding new ways of, as you say, getting up in the morning, a reason for being there, and living in a community like this really contributes a lot to that transition of how am I going to keep my mind and interests and interaction with other people at a certain level that I feel comfortable with.
Earning your law degree shouldn't burden you with overwhelming debt. At Massachusetts School of Law at Andover, we believe it should be affordable, achievable, and yes, even an enjoyable first step to your successful career. We believe in an atmosphere of support, flexible class scheduling, and hiring professors with real-world experience, ensuring you leave law school with the professional skills you need. We are the most affordable law school in New England, and we believe in you.
The Massachusetts School of Law. Your future starts here.
Welcome back. If asked who my hero is, it would be my dad, who worked 60 hours a week in a hot paper mill for his family. He was the only person I ever knew who literally stopped the car and got out to help an elderly person cross the street. Much to my mom's dismay, He brought home homeless people for meals, and he picked up anyone he saw walking that appeared to need a ride. When his eldest son became brain damaged, he became a tireless advocate for the disabled. Then he became my mom's caretaker when she lost her legs to diabetes. My father's hard work, sense of humor, kindness, loyalty, and courage inspire me. So who inspires our guests? Let's listen.
Because I thought about this, I knew you were going to ask us this, and I went from ancient history all the way to today, and I kept changing my heroes. And finally, I decided the other day when I watched her on television, and I watched her say, "Don't mess with me." And
Exactly.
Boy, is that you, Norma.
That's when I said, there's a hero.
There's my hero, I think, for the moment, because it was so appropriate. She has never buckled down. Nobody has ever scared her. Nobody has ever said you can't do what you're doing. And my goodness, the kind of pressure that woman must be feeling on an hourly basis right at the moment. And I loved that. That phrase did it for me. It was a very simple phrase, but when she said it, I thought, oh yeah, that's the kind of woman I hope I have raised, and I hope I've encouraged my granddaughters to be, and I guess that's who I am.
Other heroes.
I think that I didn't find one that was a big name, but all in my life, all along the way, there have been people that I thought, wow, that's really inspirational.
Yeah.
That could help me. One of my close friends is in her, I think, early 80s. She was a mathematician, brilliant, tried to get in departments to study computer science, and was rejected because they said it's men only. And she fought and went sideways and backwards and forwards, ended up as a professor at MIT, and won what for computer scientists is the Nobel Prize, the Turing Prize.
Oh my.
And this woman, we've been friends for many, many years, to see how hard she had to work and stick to it as opposed to teaching math in high school, you know, to get this route and to finally get this reward was, to me, heroic.
Yeah. And see, that brings to mind somebody I think of as my anti-hero, okay? When I was in the 8th grade, we had to take all kinds of tests. You know, I'm sure they were aptitude tests and intelligence. And I got called down to the principal's office. Now, I'd never been called down to the principal's office. And it was to tell me how well I had done, better than anybody she had ever seen. So I should really think about becoming a teacher. And I have great respect for teachers, but it's something I know I am totally incapable of, and I knew I was incapable of it at that age. And I thought, is that the only avenue that would be open to me? And
Women were nurses
and teachers.
Or teachers.
I know, but
And
I look
secretaries.
back at it now, and I think, well, I certainly never aspired to be a teacher, and I will say this, honestly, I think a good teacher is worth their weight in gold. I think we
hardest
underpay
job.
teachers. I am not denigrating it, but I know my own talents. I do not have the patience to be a teacher. But I think, did that kind of play through the rest of my life that I couldn't aspire to be more? So it was not a hero, it was, and I'm sure she meant exceedingly well.
Yeah.
But it kind of boomeranged.
Other heroes. Final advice to the women in the audience. You have a hero.
Well, my Aunt Catherine, and this was in the 30s, and she was my godmother. My mother, of course, was the #1 hero, but Aunt Catherine was a career woman when there were no career women. And I can remember her inviting me to her apartment, her very own apartment. And she was on the 2nd floor, and the trolleys went right by her window. I could stand there and see all the faces of the people very clearly. And she just lived a fabulous life, I thought. to me as a little girl, 6, 7 years old, staying at her house. I thought it was a fabulous
I had Aunt
time.
Mary, same story.
And I do have a little thing I'd like to say, what came out of my work life. One of the best things I remember is, as I was in management, the men in my team told me they were so happy to know that they could be friends with a woman. That was a very big breakthrough.
Very big compliment.
It is.
Yeah. I've worked for a number of women in my professional life, but the one who was really a standout, she was a friend before I worked for her. Her name is Mary Jane Gibson. She was the first woman to be appointed to a leadership position in the House of Representatives in Massachusetts. And when she was given that appointment as Assistant Majority Whip, which was woo-woo, she asked me to come and work for her. And we had a long relationship, sort of working on political campaigns together before I started to work for her. But she was so grounded. I mean, when I look at her now in comparison to politicians, as they now, that word has such a negative connotation, she was centered. I mean, she was really smart, but she was centered morally, ethically. She knew what her role was in terms of her leadership position, but she never lost her ethics. You know, she never compromised her values to make a point that needed to be made. And I was just really fortunate. I learned from her. We shared the same values, which made our work life together just pure bliss.
Thank you for those comments.
And I think in the workplace, women and men both have a role. And when they get along together and actually assist each other in their work, the workplace works, truly. And it's not just women alone or men alone, but it's the combination that assist students or anyone in the society to understand that there are strengths in all people and there are weaknesses in all people. And we have some very weak people who are in high positions, and we are fortunate to have strong people in high positions when they are there.
Final comments for the audience.
I think my final comment is kind of right back to my original. Decide what's really important to you. Go after it with the understanding that it may not be that important to other people, so be willing to make compromises.
Wonderful advice.
I don't know whether they listen or not. My daughter never does. I keep telling her, I've lived this life, listen to me. But again, it's looking at what your priorities are, trying to see the big picture and not get hung up on the details, on the small little pieces. But if you can get that big picture, that will help you form a plan.
Ladies, thank you so much. This has been a delightful hour for me. I've learned a lot, and I hope our audience has as well. So thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So there you have it, an amazing group of women sharing their experiences with us. Thank you to our guests for their time and their insight, and thank you for joining us. So until next time, you be well.
taking the first step towards your legal career can be an overwhelming task at many other law schools. Lucky for you, the Massachusetts School of Law is not one of those schools. Applying is easy. No LSATs required. Scheduling is flexible with daytime and evening classes, and learning is remarkably rewarding since all of our professors have real-world experience. All of this and much more at the most affordable law school in New England.
The Massachusetts School of Law. Your future starts here.